See if this timer thing works. Start. Hello, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Sorry. If anyone besides Grant had asked me to do this, I would have said I had COVID and insisted on doing it over Zoom. I came here a few years ago. I can't remember. It was the old airport. That's all I know. It was the old airport. And I gave two or three talks, and they were the best talk. I mean, they were great talks, obviously, but the engagement, Arabic, like tawafuq, like agree, like the kind of connection between me and the students. I've never felt that as intimate and close a connection as I felt here, and I don't know what that means, but it was a really terrific experience. So when I got asked to come back, I obviously said yes, and I'm very happy to be here. That being said, what I've been asked to do is probably criminal in the sense that we could spend, and I don't just mean that because everyone thinks what they study is important, but we could spend a long, long, long time, like days and days and days, first of all on Hadia's material, but then even more so on this material. So what I'm going to do right now is really almost criminal. I'm going to be so short and deal with such intense stuff that I really want you to pay attention. Listen to my words. Here. So basically, okay, anyway, I'll start going now. I won't waste any time. Okay, primary scripture, secondary scripture. We've just heard about the primary scripture, the Quran. And those of you who are thinking, what does this mean, primary scripture, secondary scripture? It's very familiar in the Abrahamic tradition. You have the primary scripture, which is revealed by God, and either immediately or very quickly put into written form, right? In Judaism, it's the Torah. In Christianity, it's the Old Testament, the Septuagint, right? In Islam, it's the Quran. And then you have a secondary scripture, which is primarily oral, and it explains the primary scripture. So the primary scripture is read through and understood through the secondary scripture. The 5 books of Moses in Judaism are understood through and interpreted through the oral Torah, literally Torah in the mouth, which is the rabbinical tradition, also believed to have been given to Moses on Sinai. In Christianity, the primary scripture, the Septuagint, is read through and understood through the teachings of Jesus, the secondary scripture, which are then set down in writing, within a matter of, let's say, 8 or 9 decades or a century and a half of the life of Jesus, right? So the lamb and the sacrifice of the lamb in the Psalms becomes the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, as read through the secondary scripture. These secondary scriptures, primarily oral, are written down usually when there is anxiety about the loss of their meaning or about some kind of overly contested understanding, right? In the case of Islam, you have the primary scripture, which is the Quran. The Quran is a very small book. It is not Hadia, what's the usual thing? Is it like 3/4 the size of the New Testament or something? I used to know this, but I can't remember. If you remember, let me know. Okay, and in terms of law, there's only about 100 verses of the Quran which deal with issues of kind of Islamic law and ritual and things like that. So a lot of things that we, everyone associates with Islam, 5 daily prayers, things like that, are not in the Quran. If you look in the Quran there's 5, verily you shall pray 5 times a day, and the prayer times are A, B, C, D. You're not going to find it in the Quran. It's not there. This comes from the secondary scripture, which is the sunnah of the prophet. Sunnah means tradition. It means the path, literally the path of the tribe, like the way of the tribe. It's the way of the tribe of Muhammad. It's the authoritative precedent of the Prophet Muhammad. It is, as one Muslim scholar puts it, an infallible application of the book of God. The sunnah of the Prophet is the Prophet Muhammad living out through his words and actions, his lifestyle, his teachings, the message of the Quran, and therefore explaining it, affirming it, and adding to it. Explaining it, affirming it, and adding to it, right? The sunnah of the Prophet, you have to read the Quran through the sunnah of the Prophet. And all Muslims have agreed on this until basically a century ago when some Muslims said no, but Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, every type of Muslim you can imagine, they all believe you read the Quran through the Sunnah of the Prophet. They just disagree about what the Sunnah of the Prophet is. And therefore they disagree on the meaning of the Quran. After the Sunnah of the Prophet, it's sort of received and interpreted and understood and lived out by his companions, the first generation of Muslims, then the second generation of Muslims, and then eventually just generation after generation after generation, century after century after century of Muslim scholars until the modern day, right? So if you think about it as like a set of concentric circles or a very large, very divine onion, it could be the title of my next book, Large and Divine Onion. So the outer skin, the outer is the Muslim scholars of today who are interpreting, inheriting what they learned from their teachers, who are inheriting what they learned from their teachers, who are inheriting all the way back to the first generations of Muslims who inherited their understanding of the Sunnah of the Prophet from the Prophet Muhammad, who taught and lived out for them the meaning of the Quran. Right? So I mentioned earlier, you have to read the Quran through the Sunnah of the Prophet. If you think that there's 5 daily prayers in Islam, and if you don't, you're not Muslim, there has to be something besides the Quran. And that something is the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Quran tells you pray a lot, many times, right? When, how many times? How do you actually physically do the prayer? Everyone sees the pictures of Muslims bowing and things like that. That's not mentioned in the Quran. This is described by the Prophet Muhammad in his Sunnah. And by the way, some Muslims like to argue that we should read the Quran, understand Islam through the Quran alone. I'm not sure they want to do that because if they did, the Quran says the thief, male or female, faqtu idayhima, cut their hand off as an exemplary punishment for what they've done. That's what the Quran says. But we know from the Sunnah of the Prophet that the thing has to be above a certain value. We know that the judge is supposed, from the companions of the Prophet and the Prophet himself, that you're supposed to ask the person many times, are you sure you did this? Didn't you think this was yours? Right? All sorts of other issues, to the point that in the actual practice of the Sharia of Islamic law, it's essentially, unless you want to get your hand cut off, you will not get your hand cut off, even if you steal, something extremely valuable. You'll get another punishment. It just won't be getting your hand chopped off. If you're interested in this, I know it's a big issue. I wrote a good article on it called Stoning and Hand Cutting. Or you can find it on Yaqeen Institute website. All right. This is going ahead of me. Okay. The Quran is a discrete book, right? I have one in my bag. I have a Mus'haf bag. I'm sure lots of people have them here with them, right? There is no, if you go to the library and you say, okay, I'm really interested in the Quran, but now I just saw this great talk by Jonathan Brown, and I want to learn about the Sunnah. So can you give me like the Sunnah? There's no book. There is no book of the Sunnah. The Sunnah is scripture in the sense of divine revelation. There's no contained form of the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Sunnah takes several forms, and it's in favoring or emphasizing one of these forms over the other in different contexts that you find the reason for much of the plurality that Hadia talked about in Islamic law and theology. So one form of the Sunnah of the Prophet is communal practice. Why is it that in the mosque, everybody, when the imam gets up to give the sermon, everyone looks at the imam and faces them? There's nothing in the Quran that says this. There's no textual source that says this. What about the fact that you don't pay zakat, charity tax, on green vegetables? Did you know that? Probably because they go bad really quickly and it's not going to last. But this is something that Muslims have always done. These are just things that Muslims have always done. The lived practice of the Muslim community. It's also a tradition of reasoning, a tradition of problem solving. We might think of it as sort of like a spirit of the law. What are the values and the ways that the Muslims are supposed to think about things they learn from the companions of the Prophet, that they learned from the Prophet himself, that he was inspired with by God? So, for example, this is a good example. Hadi kind of talked about it, right? The Quran, the Prophet says, or the Quran says that people of the book, and usually this is understood as Christians and Jews mostly, if if they're living under Muslim rule, they can continue practicing their religion. They just pay jizya tax. Okay. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, oh, I should have said, I'm Muslim. You know what? I should probably just change my name. This is getting too inconvenient. So the Prophet Muhammad says, take the jizya from the Zoroastrians of a place called Hajar in Eastern Arabia, right? So the Prophet says, he extends this ruling to Zoroastrians. Then this tradition of reasoning, the early Muslims from the companions' time onward, they treat every community they come across as people of the book. So when Muslims meet Hindus, when they enter Sindh in the year 711, or when they meet Buddhists in northeastern Iran and Central Asia, these are not people of the book, and they're not mentioned in the Quran. They're not mentioned in the Sunnah of the Prophet as people you take the jizya from. But they think this is what the Prophet would do in this situation. When Muslims meet people practicing traditional African religions in sub-Saharan Africa, they also take the jizya from them. So they even though they're polytheists, they can continue, at least from a Muslim perspective, they can continue practicing their religion. All right, what's happening here? Sorry. Okay, I think I must have set some timer on this thing where it's changing automatically. Okay, so the forms of the Sunnah, communal practice, tradition and problem solving, and, wait for it, Hadith. Someone's saying, wait a second, I was learning about Hadith. Here's the Hadith, people. Hadith are the most textual form of the Sunnah of the Prophet. If you actually want to go find a book that's going to be something like a book on the Sunnah of the Prophet, it's going to be books of Hadith. Hadith are reports about things the Prophet said, things the Prophet did, or things, by the way, that were done in his presence and to which he did not object. Why is that important? Because if you're eating something next to the Prophet and he doesn't say, you shouldn't eat that, that means you're allowed to eat it, right? So these are the Hadiths are reports about the things the Prophet said, the Prophet did, things that were done in his presence and to which he did not object. All right. Unlike the Quran, the Hadiths are not written down relatively quickly. I mean, the Quran, think about in especially kind of pre-modern period, this is set down in permanent form very quickly. We're talking maybe within a few years of his death, like 2 or 3 years, and definitely within 20 years of his death. And that in pre-modern times is pretty impressive. The Hadiths are not written down like this. We have early Muslims kept kind of their own little notes of what the things the Prophet said and did. In the early 700s, early Muslim scholars kind of try to collect more material, and we have some beginning of written collections. They didn't have paper, right? Paper only came from China in the late 700s. Writing materials like papyrus, parchment are very expensive. We have some of these surviving fragments from the mid to late 700s, a lot from the early 800s. And the major collections of hadiths are done in the 800s, and then a lot in the 900s and in the 1000s. But the mainstay hadith collections are done in the 800s. And unlike the Quran, which, as I said, is a very small, discrete book, there's no limit to the hadiths. You'll say, wait a second. What do you mean there's no limit? We'll discuss reliability in a second. But in effect, if you went to a library and you looked at all the books of hadith collections, it would be just shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves of hadiths, of books of collections of hadith. But in Sunni Islam, there are 6 books which are seen as the kind of mainstay collections that you'd look at. They contain about 20,000 hadiths. And because a lot of hadiths are kind of repetitions of one another, they're like different versions of the same report, or maybe 2 reports stuck together. If you look at with repetitions, about 35,000, but without repetitions, about 20,000 hadiths in these 6 books. In Shiite Islam, in Imami Shiism, there's 4 collections, also written kind of 800s into the early 900s. Now, there's a problem, right? If you look at the Quran, you won't find any evidence of, the early civil wars in the Muslim community. You won't find any political disagreements, right? In fact, one of the reasons that Western scholars think the Quran comes from such an early period and isn't tampered with after that is because it doesn't bear any indication of these later intra-Muslim conflicts. So it's sort of, it predates them. This is not true for the Hadith corpus, okay? The Hadith corpus, there's a huge problem of Hadith forgery. And if you, maybe another useful parallel to kind of secondary scripture in the Christian tradition would be the problem of inauthentic gospels. So there's just sort of like proliferation of claims about the teachings of Jesus that are all, here's a book that purports to be the Gospel of Judas or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and et cetera, et cetera. All these different claims are being made. And what are people doing, right? As people convert to Islam in the late 600s, early 700s, 800s, they are bringing in their own cultural traditions, their own political disputes. Muslims are having their own civil wars. They're having theological discussions and arguments with one another. They're having legal debates with one another. And one guy's saying, my city's the best city in the world. Another guy's saying, your city's awful. My scholar's great. Your city's awful. Or your scholar's awful. All these ideas, what better way to legitimate them than to say, well, the prophet said that your city stinks. And the prophet said that my city is awesome, right? So that's literally the stuff you find in a lot of Hadith collections. So Muslim scholars, beginning in the second and third generations, they recognize there's this huge problem of forgery. There is a huge problem of forgery. But here's the problem. How do you figure out what something that the prophet really said, stop it, versus something that somebody is forging and attributing to the prophet? One way, right? If I said to you, believe this is really incredible. I was digging in my backyard, and I found this old text, and it says, this is the last will and testament of George Washington, and there will come a time, my American children, that there will be a man whose hair is as orange as the fire of hell. His skin also remarkably colored orange, right? Who will be bigly criticized and cause great I'd be like, oh, wow, look, I have proof that we shouldn't like Donald Trump, but why is this something George Washington wrote or not? Who can tell me? Come on, use your students. Show me your critical minds. Is it not? It's not something. Why is it not something George Washington wrote? You guys don't like George Washington? You don't respect his opinion? Because people don't know the future. Unless you're a prophet, which means that you can know the future, because God can tell you the future. So here's a problem. If you see a report that says, there will come a time that my community will break up into 72 sects, or there will come a time that a certain group of people will have this belief, and you shouldn't follow it. You can't use that test we would normally use, because he's a prophet. God could have told him this information, right? So things like that we would generally use to try and figure out if something's a forgery or not, some of those tools don't really work. Here's another problem. This is very reasonable. If the Prophet Muhammad is explaining to us the Quran in the sunnah of the Prophet, and if the hadiths are one of the ways we know about the sunnah, then clearly a hadith can't contradict the Quran, because that wouldn't make any sense. I mean, the Prophet is contradicting God. So if the Quran says there's only one God, and then there's a hadith that says, just, been a revision, there's two gods, that can't be accepted. But here's the problem. How do you know the difference between contradiction and explanation? The Quran says that carrion has been prohibited for you. So if you go, I see a lot of roadkill. I imagine you have this issue here too. In my area, it's like roadkill everywhere. Sometimes I think, I should take one of these deer and eat venison. But I can't, because I'm not allowed to eat carrion as a Muslim. However, there's a hadith that says that the companions of the Prophet were on the Red Sea coast, and they found a giant beached whale, and they were hungry, and they started having, whale burgers or whatever they made out of it. They told the Prophet about it, and he affirmed it. Wait a second. This contradicts the Quran. Or is the Prophet explaining that the Quranic command about not eating carrion applies to land animals, not to animals from the sea. Right? So that's the general, like, certainly I'd say probably majority Muslim understanding, right? Anything that comes from the ocean, you can actually eat, even if it's dead. Not all Muslims think this, but I'd say the majority. So you have a problem. Criticize, content criticism just to detect forgery is difficult. So Muslims start to, especially Sunni Muslims, in fact, this kind of defines Sunni Islam. They say, let's try and take meaning out of the equation. Let's try and figure out what's forgery, what's a forgery, what's not a forgery, through looking at the transmission of the hadith. And here you have kind of two challenges and activities of Muslim scholars regarding the sunnah of the Prophet, in particular, the authenticity of hadiths, and then how you understand these hadiths, how you relate them with other hadiths, how you relate them with other forms of the sunnah of the Prophet, like communal practice, reasoning, how you relate them with the Quran. So first of all, you have to figure out, is the hadith authentic? And we'll do an exercise on that in 1 second. We'll do transmission criticism in 1 second. But in general, Muslims would say, all Muslims would say this, all Muslim scholars. If a hadith clearly contradicts the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad said there's two gods. Okay, that can't be something he really said. If it clearly contradicts reason, here's a good one. The first thing God created was the horse. Then the horse sweated, and it created the world out of its sweat. Okay, somehow somebody made this up. I don't know, maybe they found like a stash of hallucinogenic drugs or something, but somebody made this up. If it contradicts reason, it can't be accepted. Like first principles of reason, like principle of non-contradiction. And if it contradicts the established sunnah of the Prophet, it can't be something the Prophet said. But in general, Muslim scholars are very reluctant to engage in like this content criticism, because when you're dealing with the Prophet, you don't know. Like, you don't want to make your sensibilities and your reason and your understanding of the Quran the criterion for what might be prophetic speech, because he's the one who's explaining the Quran to you. So it's a very difficult balance. A good example of this is a hadith that says, alleged hadith that says that a child born of fornication will not enter heaven. This, Muslim scholars, first of all, the chain of transmission was very unreliable, but also this just clearly contradicts a very distinct, unambiguous Quranic principle, which is no bearer of burdens bears the burdens of another. La taziru waziratun wizra ukhra. No bearer of burdens bears the burden of another. So this child didn't do anything wrong. How can it be denied a chance to have salvation? So this is just rejected. The bigger challenge is not, well, I wouldn't say the bigger, an equal challenge, besides trying to prove if the attestation is reliable, is this something the Prophet said or not, is how to understand it. How to understand it. A good example of this is a hadith that's considered to be reliable. It says that cursing another Muslim is iniquitous, and fighting another Muslim is unbelief, kufr, unbelief. Like the opposite of being Muslim, okay? On its face, this hadith seems to say that so I'm Muslim, Hadi is Muslim, she was recently in a car accident, it wasn't her fault, and I realized this is exactly the chance I have to finally settle my score with her. So I go up and kick her as hard as I can. Now, I have, according to this hadith, I'm not a believer anymore. I've fought another Muslim, and that's unbelief. So technically, I'm not a Muslim anymore, which is not a good thing. This is not how the hadith is understood. Why? It has to be fit into a bigger system. What are the Quranic verses on this issue? What do other hadiths say? What do our sense perception tell us about the world, right? So we know from a verse from the Quran that says, if two parties from amongst the believers, Muslims, come to have a battles, like fight each other with swords and stuff, then you should try and reconcile between them. Therefore, two groups of people who started fighting each other with swords and things were both called Muslims by the Quran. Therefore, this can't literally mean that me doing this, I would just be a really bad Muslim. Or what this means is that action is sort of on the path to unbelief, or that action is sort of a manifestation of unbelief, but that I'm still a Muslim. And therefore you get a general principle in Islam, which is that actions don't take you out of the religion. It's only beliefs. Like if I think it's okay, if I drink alcohol, I'm just being a bad Muslim. If I think I'm allowed to drink alcohol, now I'm not a Muslim anymore, because it's about my belief, not my actions. Okay. But this hadith is a great example of one of the biggest challenges Muslim scholars have in understanding the sunnah of the Prophet, understanding the hadiths in particular, which is the nature of prophetic speech. Prophets don't talk like lawyers, because if they did, no one would listen to them. Everyone would be like, I'm out of here. I'm not. They certainly wouldn't be motivated by them, right? I have nothing against lawyers, but lawyers who are great motivators usually don't talk like lawyers when they're motivating their followers, right? The prophetic speech, the speech of the Prophet Muhammad, is characterized by one of the things it's characterized by is hyperbole, or sometimes understatements, but a lot of times hyperbole. And this creates a real challenge, which is Muslim scholars have to derive very fine rules of law and theology from speech that is often not the kind of speech that lawyers would engage in. It's hyperbolic speech. This example of, this thing is getting away from me again, of me attacking Hadia, God forbid, not being Muslim anymore. This is an example of how they took the hyperbolic language of the Prophet and understood its legal meaning or its theological meaning by comparing it, like putting it into the larger system of the Quran, the established sunnah of the Prophet, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, good example of this is the hadith we're going to look at, which is hadith of traveling by sea. Okay, so here you have change of transmission. They're called isnads in Arabic. Up at the top you have, why am I looking over there? I'm going to look here. Up at the top you have books. There's the Sunan of Abu Dawood. He's from Sijistan, Iran, dies 889 of the Common Era, so kind of written in the mid-800s. Sunan of Sa'id bin Mansur, it's earlier, the early 800s. Akhbar Mecca al-Faqihi, also late 800s. So these are the books that, like if you were to go to the library and want to do research on this, you would go and get those books out of the library. Okay. You have change of transmission going back to the Prophet Muhammad, and you have two versions. Remember when I mentioned repetitions of hadith and why the numbers of hadiths in a book change depending whether it's a repetition or not? These are two versions of what's clearly the same statement, but one of them has this extra part on it. Okay, so let's start with the blue one on the left. Let no one travel by sea except on pilgrimage or fighting in the path of God. For under the oceans is fire, and under the fire is another ocean. Sorry. Okay. Now, we talked about sense perception. This would be a good argument for saying, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense because I don't know about there being fire under there. Maybe it means like magma and stuff like that and volcanoes. But then what about an ocean under that? It doesn't seem to accord with our understanding of the cosmos or the Earth. But anyway, now, it's not really a problem because if we look at this chain of transmission, the blue chain of transmission, that first guy, unknown. The guy says, a guy told me. So basically what the isnad is, Ismail bin Zakaria said, Mutarif bin Tarif told me, that Bishr bin Abi Abdullah told me, that Bashir bin Muslim told him, that Abdullah bin Amr told him that the Prophet said something. So it's like sort of like a game of telephone, right? And then you have other chains. Mutarif bin Tarif told me that Khalid bin Abi Muslim told him that Abdullah bin Amr told him that the Prophet said. So you can see these as like a transmission of a text, either orally or written, and then kind of getting set down in this book, which survives. These books at the top of the page. So Bashir bin Muslim said, a guy told me. Who's that guy? We have no idea. He could be crazy. He could be a liar. So in addition, by the way, Bishr bin Abi Abdullah, Bashir bin Muslim, no one knows who they are. No one knows if they're reliable. No one knows if they transmitted material reliably, et cetera, et cetera. They could be crazy. They could be liars. They could not even exist. So that chain of transmission is totally unreliable. So you can forget about, this issue is off the table. We don't have to worry about oceans under fire and fires under ocean anymore. Now we just have to engage in the challenge of interpretation, because let no one travel by sea except one on pilgrimage or fighting in the path of God. Sorry, Dr. Esposito. I know, well, I don't know after COVID if you're the jet setter you used to be, but you should try getting an appointment with this guy before COVID. He was constantly on airplanes. This would really put a dent in his frequent flyer status if he was not allowed to travel overseas, except, well, I guess teaching is fighting in the path of God. So you have an excuse. You have a license. But here, can anyone think, and I'll be very impressed, can anyone think of a problem with this hadith? Yes. What? Living on an island, yeah. That's rough. What if it's like a little island? That's really, yes.
Well, there might be a great, dangerous situation. There's the only transportation available is by ship.
Yeah, sometimes you have to, yeah.
I believe this saying is not correct hadith from other scholars say.
No, this is generally pretty correct. Okay, the Quran talks about looking at the boats, وَتَرَى الْفُلْكَ تَجْرِي فِيهَا مُوَاخِرَ فِيهَا وَلِتَبْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. The Quran says in several places, one of God's signs are the ships that sail in the ocean by which you seek the bounty of God. Would that you would reflect so that you might be thankful. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The Quran is saying one of the signs of God is traveling by sea in the ocean to seek in commerce. So this contradicts the Quran. So one answer would be, our friend here said, maybe it's something the Prophet didn't say. But that's a jump that a lot of Muslim scholars wouldn't want to take. Generally, historically, what they have said is, what this means is that the Prophet's speech is hyperbolic. He's either saying that these reasons for traveling by ocean are praiseworthy, are extremely important, or he's emphasizing the danger of traveling by sea. So these are examples. That's just, I think I went a few minutes over, but the sunnah of the Prophet is authoritative precedent through which we understand and read the Quran. One of the best and most important manifestations of the sunnah is the hadiths. And when you get to hadiths, you have a problem of authenticating them and then understanding them within the bigger system of the Quran, reason, sunnah of the Prophet, etc. Thank you very much.